In the heart of Penn State's Pattee Library, a murder took place that has haunted both students and investigators for over 5 decades. On the quiet afternoon of November 28, 1969, a bright and promising 22-year-old graduate student was brutally stabbed in the stacks of the library. Without a scream, without a sign of a struggle, her life was taken in the blink of an eye, and her killer vanished into the shadows. Despite the presence of others in the library, no one saw the attack. To this day, the murder remains one of the most chilling, unsolved cases in Pennsylvania's history, a case filled with questions, whispers, and paranormal rumors that refuse to fade. Was her death a crime of opportunity, or something far more sinister? This is the story of Betsy Aardsma. Hello, friends. My name is Marcia, and this is Midwest Murders. In 1969, Pennsylvania, like much of the United States, was experiencing a period of significant social and political upheaval. The late 1960s were marked by the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, and shifting cultural norms. The growing anti-war sentiment contributed to an environment of tension, with many young people actively questioning authority and traditional values. While the war and draft created a sense of national unity for some, for others it fueled unrest and rebellion. Penn State University, where the murder occurred, was a thriving institution during this time, with a growing student body and an expanding campus. The 1960s brought more students from diverse backgrounds, attracted by Penn State's reputation as a leading public university. The university was a microcosm of the broader societal changes, where students and faculty were influenced by the turbulent political climate, but also focused on academic achievement and innovation. Against this backdrop of social change, the murder of Betsy Aardsma stood out as an incomprehensible act of violence, shaking the already fragile sense of safety and adding to the broader feelings of uncertainty in the state and the nation. Elizabeth Ruth Betsy Aardsma, age 22, was a beautiful 5'8" tall auburn-haired beauty, the second of 4 children born to Esther and Richard Aardsma. Raised in a middle-class, religious, and conservative household in Holland, Michigan, her father was a sales tax auditor for the Michigan State Treasurer, her mother a housewife. In October 1969, Betsy had enrolled at Penn State to pursue a postgraduate degree in English and art. She resided on campus in Atherton Hall with her roommate, Sharon Brandt. Betsy seldom pursued extracurricular activities and spent much of her free time either studying or, on the weekends, traveling to Penn State Hershey to visit her boyfriend, David Wright. Betsy spent the day before Thanksgiving 1969 in the company of her boyfriend, his roommates, and their girlfriends, before returning to her dormitory the following day to work on a research paper she needed to complete for an assignment. Her boyfriend drove her to the bus stop in Harrisburg on the afternoon of November 27th. The following day, November 28, 1969, Betsy and her roommate left their residence in the afternoon to visit Penn State's Pattee Library. Once they arrived at the library, the two parted company after making plans to meet up later that afternoon at a movie theater. After finding the reference material she was looking for in the card catalog, Betsy walked down a flight of stairs into the Level 2 core stacks at approximately 4:30 p.m. to retrieve the material. For those of you unfamiliar with library terminology, stacks is a book storage area as opposed to a reading area. Shortly after 4:30 p.m., Assistant Supervisor Dean Brungart observed a girl in a red dress standing alone in an aisle, with 2 young men talking quietly among themselves in a nearby aisle closer to the west end of the core. Approximately 10 minutes later, another witness, Richard Allen, was using a photocopier when he overheard a conversation between a male and a female in the general direction of where Betsy stood. Moments later, he heard a metallic crashing noise, and a young man, whom he described as looking like a student, ran past him. Mary Erdley, a student who knew Betsy, got up from her desk to investigate and encountered 2 men who told her that someone needed help and led her towards rows 50 and 51 before vanishing. She found Betsy laying on the floor among scattered books. Having no clue what had happened to Betsy, she stayed by her side and for the next 15 to 20 minutes tried to get passing students to help her before anyone would stop. A call was placed to the campus hospital, the Ridenour Health Center, at 5:01 p.m. 2 student paramedics dispatched to a girl had fainted call were surprised to see a librarian performing CPR on Betsy while a crowd of onlookers gathered around. Betsy was quickly placed on a gurney and taken to the health center as the paramedics continued to perform CPR. Wearing a white turtleneck sweater under a heavy red sleeveless winter dress, neither the knife tear in her dress nor the small amount of blood from her injury was easily visible and wasn't discovered until she reached the health center. Betsy was pronounced dead at 5:50 p.m. Center County Coroner Robert Neff reported Betsy had been killed by a single stab wound which had penetrated her breastbone, piercing her heart and severing her pulmonary artery, causing extensive hemorrhaging into her chest cavity. Death had most likely occurred within 5 minutes. It was believed Betsy's murderer had been facing her and had intentionally aimed for her heart, and that her assailant was right-handed. The murder weapon could not be identified. Lieutenant William Kimmel of the Pennsylvania State Police Rockview Substation took the lead on the investigation. Between 30 and 45 Pennsylvania State Police troopers assisted with the investigation. Hundreds of students were interviewed, and the entire campus was unsuccessfully searched in an effort to locate the murder weapon. A $25,000 reward was offered for information. Investigators would soon discover that up to 400 individuals would typically enter or exit the library between 4:30 and 5 p.m. on a Friday, although on this date only about 90 had done so. Before police had even been notified of Betsy's death, the crime scene was compromised as library staff, believing that she had fainted or fallen, had ordered janitors to clean the tile floor in the aisle, fix the shelving, and restack the fallen books. Because of this, any physical evidence potentially left by her murderer at the scene was destroyed or contaminated. However, the first trooper to arrive on the scene, Mike Simmers, ordered the area secured. A series of small, fresh blood droplets matching Betsy's blood type were discovered on the staircase landing into the level 3 core stacks, indicating her murderer had left the library via that route. Police theorized that Betsy did not know her killer as he fled the scene without knowing whether she would survive to identify him. Investigators discounted the possibility that she had been stalked, as she had not been expected to be at Penn State that day, but with her boyfriend, who was quickly eliminated as a suspect. They began to suspect it might be a random killing. Another theory put forth by investigators was that Betsy may have observed two men engaging in sexual behavior in the poorly lit and somewhat lonely part of the core, had recognized one or both men, and had been murdered to prevent her from telling what she had seen. This theory seemed to gain some traction when police found a half-empty can of soda and a small stack of pornographic magazines on a desk a few aisles from where Betsy had been killed, in a section of the core used to store desks and spare shelving. More than 24 pornographic magazines were found concealed between books in the aisle where she had been murdered, and ample traces of semen were discovered in multiple locations on the floor, shelves, and walls. These discoveries led investigators to conclude secluded areas of the stacks were used to conduct illicit sexual encounters. Although partial fingerprints were obtained from the can of soda, they did not match any within the police databases. All fingerprints upon and within the magazines were smudged and unusable. While more than 1,500 individuals were questioned, police stated that at least 20 individuals were in the area at the time of the murder, but only 8 could be located. Normally a hub of activity at night, there were only about 90 individuals in the entire library at that time due to the holiday recess. Betsy's body was returned to her hometown of Holland, Michigan for burial. A poem she wrote in high school in 1965, expressing love of life and fear of death, was the theme of the sermon during funeral services performed by Reverend Gordon Van Oostenburg at Trinity Reformed Church. Betsy was laid to rest on December 3, 1969. She was buried in the family plot in the Pilgrim Home Cemetery with a single rose from her boyfriend placed in her hands. The final letter Betsy wrote to her boyfriend arrived at his address the day after her killing. Betsy's murder ultimately became a major factor in the creation of a university police force at Penn State. The years prior to her death had seen an increase in both violent crime, sexual assaults, and disorderly student protests at the university, which had only a campus patrol to provide immediate law and order. Her death epitomized the need for increased public safety measures on the university campus, and a university police force was established in the early 1970s. Following the murder, security cameras were installed in the library elevators, and anyone who needed to go to the second core level had to be escorted. Staff members tried to avoid the area. In 1970, a knife was found beneath some bushes outside the university's recreation hall. The size and shape of this weapon was a precise match for the blade which had inflicted Betsy's fatal wound. However, the passage of time had eroded any physical evidence on the weapon. Author Derek Sherwood and investigative journalist David Deacock have written books about the case and have named who they believe is the killer. I have linked the books in the description below if you're interested. Both strongly believe a Penn State professor, who was then a 25-year-old geology student at the university, was responsible for her death. While the circumstantial evidence against him is compelling, I have chosen not to name him as he is deceased and was never charged. The murder of Betsy Aardsma has left behind not just a cold case, but an enduring sense of unease in the halls of Pattee Library. As the years have passed, her story continues to evoke a mix of sorrow, curiosity, and fear. Some say her spirit still lingers, trapped in a labyrinth of stacks where she met her untimely end. Despite the tireless efforts of investigators, the case remains unsolved with no clear answers or justice for Betsy. But her memory lives on, in both the minds of those who knew her and the countless others drawn to the eerie mysteries surrounding her death. Perhaps one day the truth will emerge from the shadows, and Betsy's spirit can finally rest. Until then, her story remains a chilling reminder of how a single moment can change everything and how some mysteries are destined to endure. If you have any thoughts, theories, or comments about the murder of Betsy Aardsma, please share them in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and may the truth reveal itself in the shadows.